With the national lockdown in place, concerns have been raised about the safety of women, children and people with disabilities. To speak to us about government's interventions related to gender-based violence and the abuse of children and people with disabilities is the Deputy Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and People Living with Disabilities, Professor Hlengiwe Mkhize. You can also join the conversation this evening and share your views and even send your questions to the Deputy Minister. You're calling us on 010-594-5140. That number again, 010-594-5140. Minister, good evening to you and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
I mean, government has urged communities to continue with the fight against gender-based violence even within the next 21 days. But that should be hard to do for communities behind closed doors. I mean, that should pose a real challenge to many of our communities who may be aware, of what's happening, next door. But where do they go? How do they report? Speak to us about those challenges that communities would be facing and the measures that government has put in place.
I think in the context of creating awareness about the seriousness of this virus, coronavirus, there has been a clear indication of the fact that issues of gender-based violence remain a top priority of government as well. And I think that's important that even during wartime, we should be vigilant and not lose the gains we have made. Remember, we've had the emergency plan, we have had the NSP, the National Strategic Plan, and all that work has been done to curb gender-based violence. But at the present moment, we really have to put everything in the context of what is critical for the country. Because when we talk about a lockdown, it's a life and death, in the sense that it's either we abide by the regulations, keep to our houses together, and not break the regulations. We are fully aware, though, that in relationships where there are challenges, that becomes a tipping point for conflict to escalate. And of course, in that context, women and children are likely to be victims. But we don't want to create an impression that we can do any better. We do believe people should be locked in, people should stay together, express solidarity, care, warmth, and love, so that the 21 days don't feel like a long-term imprisonment, but they remain a 21-day period of preventing the spread of coronavirus.
Of course, when you say people must stay together, we're obviously not then speaking about, women who are being bashed and bruised by their partners, because I understand that government has put in measures to assist those people who are aware that they need help and cannot live in that same house for 21 days. Speak to us about some of those measures.
Yeah. Well, I was emphasizing the importance of being locked
within the house.
Yes, within, and not loitering around and doing unnecessary things, keeping to the prescripts in terms of going to get food or the chemistry or see a doctor. But with regard to instances where women pick up a threat, we have said our police stations are open 24/7. They are full-time on duty. We really encourage our women to speak out, as we have said before, but also to use the hotlines that are on our website as a department and the Department of Social Development, but also to walk to the nearest police station where we think by now the environment is conducive. The police are better aware than they were yesterday before the president picked up this battle for curbing gender-based violence. And we have seen some alterations to the environment at the police station where there's privacy. So emphasizing the importance of understanding adherence to the instructions of how to cope with coronavirus. It doesn't minimize the importance of doing all the things that we have said people must do, to report, and for the police to prioritize those cases and to deal decisively with abusers. And in instances where people have been locked in, women have said they shouldn't be given bail. Of course, all the cases should remain open, irrespective of what women who are in those relationships decide.
Sure. Are we expecting a steep increase in the number of GBV cases during the lockdown?
You know, it's our wish and hope that that doesn't happen. Remember, for all of us, the whole idea of a lockdown is overwhelming emotionally, and it's a mental health burden. It's scary. All of us, irrespective of where you are located. So if we were to see an increase of that problem as well, that will really create more problems for us, because we do believe we are in a war which needs our attention, all of us. I can't imagine if we were to divide our attention now, pushing for special courts, because remember, the police stations can take only so much. And beyond the police station, there's work which must be done by hospitals to examine these women in cases of sexual assaults. The police are all out on the streets to fight against this virus. So we hope we're not going to get those levels we've had last year, because that will be a clear distraction.
And what sort of measures are in place to almost be a watchdog over what's happening over the next 21 days? I mean, you know, there are certain communities where you know that there's a prevalence of gender-based violence here. Are there, you know, foot soldiers that have been sent out to do, you know, visits to these homes? Are there contact details that you've taken down to call the people? What measures are in place to say, look, when we see an increase in the number of people coming to our shelters that have been set up, for example, then we know there's a problem and we need to step up?
I think the shelters at the moment, they are earmarked, and people don't just go on their own to a shelter. In most instances, it's through a referral process. So there are especially women who have been working on the National Strategic Plan, what we call the NSP, which was meant to interview people countrywide, find out more information about the specifics of gender-based violence. I have been really touched by their commitment to say, look, even at this point in time, when government wants compliance, we'll be out there encouraging, talking to people, encouraging to comply. And remember, we wear the hat of ensuring that those who tell us that they are under threat, they don't want to be under the same houses with abusers, will be the first ones to take them to the police stations. And of course, these processes, especially getting them the right tools, you know, the masks, the gloves, sanitizers, those are processes that are a little bit slow. But definitely, you might have seen some out there in places like Alex, going door to door, talking to women, talking to people about coronavirus, but clearly saying with each case we'll be the first one to pick up issues of gender-based violence.
Let's just clarify this issue of the shelters. So the president, I think, was the one who announced that, you know, there would be shelters that are made available to those who are homeless, but also to women who are facing issues of gender-based violence back home and feel they can't stay there. Are you saying that those shelters are not taking walk-ins? So if I'm going through a crisis at my home, I cannot go to, you know, one of those shelters, one of 24, I believe, of those shelters, and say I need to stay here over the duration of the lockdown. Would it only be by referral?
You know, it's important for women to be sent to appropriate shelters. Some shelters are earmarked for homeless people. So if a person had gone through a police station, they are likely to be sent to a shelter which will be appropriate for their needs, maybe also cater for a child. Remember, we had a few buildings donated, helping social development by Minister Patricia de Lille. We already have seen an increase of the number of shelters. They are not closed down to women, but I was just emphasizing that because there ought to be a case. Sure. It's always important to make sure that you go through a police station so that if there's some tests and examinations to be done, they are done within a prescribed period of time, and so in terms of statistics, people could be recorded properly and be able to be tracked and followed by appropriate service providers. Okay. Remember, when it comes to gender-based violence, for instance, there are social workers who have been trained in a particular way to work with cases of trauma as against volunteers who can just assist by making sure that people in a shelter from the street, they get soap, they sanitize, they get food, they observe hygiene. But here we're talking about a real challenge of trauma and of having to prepare for a legal system.
Sure. I want us to continue with our discussion. Let's take a quick ad break now. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Well, let's continue now with our discussion on the fight against gender-based violence with the Deputy Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and People with Disabilities, Professor Hlengiwe Mkhize. Minister, before we went to the ad break, you were speaking to us about the shelters that have been made available, and one of the questions we must ask is what happens post the lockdown? So the women who have now gone to those shelters to say, I cannot stay here, for the duration of the lockdown, and then the president comes to announce to say, well, the lockdown period is over, things return back to normal. What happens to those women who've been staying at the shelter?
But I suppose they will go back to normal processes where shelters are not seen as a permanent residence. But people are not chucked out of shelters before they make alternative arrangements. Sometimes those arrangements are made through the court, but sometimes it's through assistance and prioritization of people in helping them with small businesses and helping them to pull together their lives with their children somewhere else. So we'll continue keeping an eye on especially the well-being of all women who have been affected by violence, and it's all in the National Strategic Plan as to how to assist people up to the point where they are able to stand on their own. Sure.
Speak to us as well about the Gender-Based Violence Command Center. I understand there's about 22,000 phone calls that come on a normal month, not even, a lockdown, when people are assuming that the number of those people who will be reporting cases of gender-based violence may increase. How does that call center support the fight against gender-based violence during this time?
The command center is very, very important. It is the support of the private sector. But at this point in time, the reports we are getting, some women, they complain that you can't go through. And I think it's about time that, because that has a lot to do with the increase in terms of numbers. But it's important the way it was established, it's set up, because when we visited, we were really impressed that while it was the initiative of social development, coming on board of the private sector helped a lot to bring about the abundance of technology, whereby even when you phone the police station, the station commander can locate you and see where you are and advise you where to go. I remember when we went, we were asking them and say, what if a woman is in rural areas? And they were saying, irrespective of where you are, it will be able to locate you. It's either you could be able to go there or for the police to go and rescue you in that setting. And they showed us statistics in terms of the number of people whom they've assisted. I haven't been this year, but when I went, I really felt South Africa has gone a long way in terms of using technology to help women to seek assistance, as against relying on one step just to go to the police station, which might be too risky. But with the abundance of mobile phones, there are other avenues if a woman can manage to escape to whatever corner to be able to seek help.
Sure. Let's speak about how the people living with disabilities have been included in the fight against COVID-19, especially when it comes to access to information. I mean, we see when there's a media briefing, there's always a sign language interpreter that's standing next to either the minister or the president, whoever is speaking on the day. But there's people living with so many other disabilities who may not be getting crucial information.
Yeah, well, you know what we have been doing, for instance, working in partnership with the sector, is to keep on identifying issues and feeding to our government system that these are issues that ought to be mainstreamed and should be on top of the agenda. And really, remember, South Africa is a signatory to a UN convention which regulates how to look at the well-being of persons with disabilities in times like this, during war times and so on. So we have worked very hard, and I've seen some NGOs also are sending us documents talking about special, you know, even when it comes to sanitizers, they look at specific categories of disabilities, draw our attention that we might need special protective measures. And of course, here we're talking. We don't have an interpreter. And so those are some of the things we've picked up in the process. You remember Minister Jackson Mthembu kept on saying, we are all on a high learning curve where there's no time to learn or to relax. So there are quite a number of things that we have sent through to Command Council to be constantly looked at. We will be visiting some of the centers for persons with disability to make sure that they have sufficient food, they have sanitizers, but above everything, to hear them out in terms of what they see as lacking in times like this.
I mean, one of the things that was mentioned is that the regular visits to care centers, which, you know, people living with disabilities are used to, that will cease during the 21-day lockdown. And so the question is, what happens to people who are distressed and are living with disabilities? What happens to them?
You know, the special numbers that are on our website, you know, they all can call for help. But of course, much as we are not moving around, we make phone calls, we talk to people, our staff are trained, they know all the centers where they are, and they talk to them, they check on them, whether they've got all the requirements they need. And as I've said, I mean, we are all in South Africa having to teach each other, even the mindset of observing some of the things that are in the regulations, and to encourage them. It's difficult, it's not easy, but with those who are within our centers, it's even better because they have caregivers who have been trained, who are able to isolate the needs of each and every group of persons with a disability and to meet their needs accordingly. It becomes difficult for people, for persons living with disability, persons with disability, but also who are in a family homestead, because it's not easy to access them on a daily basis. But the hotlines, the relevant numbers, they all have the special numbers and SMS numbers.
And what happens to those families who are in rural areas, the ones that are in our villages, you know, that are far away from the technology, who might not be able to be watching Newsroom Africa as we speak to the Minister about what's in place? What sort of measures have been made to include them in the fight against COVID-19? Not just to say, well, you know, you're so far away from where the infections are and where our concerns are currently. We've left you out in the lurk.
I think our provinces, the MECs, relevant MECs, have been working very hard with the support of civil society and sometimes to access tribal authorities, creating awareness and getting their commitments. And I think also we must appreciate the move of the religious sector, because they took a stance which nobody expected them to do, especially the Christian community. You know, Good Friday, Easter time, those are major, you know, very, very important times for them. But they were the first ones to respond to the call by the President and to assure South Africa that we will support, we will comply. So you know, our communities are not empty terrains. You'll have a church, you'll have a tribal authority, you have leaders in the community, if we continue to work with them. But for me, the most important thing is to make sure that the supply doesn't stop, you know, of the necessary equipments, medical equipments that they require.
Sure.
They will comply. I think there's a goodwill, there's a common understanding that here we are dealing with a very, very serious virus, which has shown deadly consequences worldwide.
Minister, I'm going to put you on the spot as we wrap up our conversation. There's a camera right there in front of you. Speak to the woman of South Africa this evening, the woman who, you know, is living in a home with her children, perhaps, and, you know, she feels unsafe. She's not sure if she's even allowed to leave the house to go and report, you know, a case that she may need to open. You know, what's your message to women of South Africa this evening who are faced with issues of gender-based violence within their homes?
Well, you know, it's important for all women of South Africa to remember the commitments that this government, under the President, have made in terms of how this issue of gender-based violence will remain a priority till such time that we cap the problem completely, this social ill. So I would really like to encourage women, of course, in the context of coronavirus, to be the first ones to be women for peace, as we always rely on women, even during wartime, ensure compliance to their spouses, their sons, their daughters, their children. We know they have a huge responsibility. If they allow this to escalate, they will carry the burden. But also, I want to assure women that our police stations are open. Just on Sunday, I witnessed a case where the police rescued a child from a biological father, and that man in no time was locked in by the police for two reasons. Because that was abduction, but also exposing the child to risk. So we remain true to the promise that the President had made to women of South Africa. We remain committed, and also, you know, our field workers who are supposed to be at the police station and everywhere. In some police stations, you find their numbers put, or if you ask for them, they give you the numbers, and they are on standby, on call, under emergency services. If a person is traumatized, the police station will arrange that they be called in, assisted to come in, and to assist women.
And women will not be told this time around that unfortunately we don't have enough officers at the police station. They're all out dealing with COVID-19. There's no one here to help you at this present moment. There's no vans that can come and pick you up, because those are just some of the things that women are faced with.
Well, there's a commitment for us not to go back, not to lose the gains we have made. A commitment for the police to prioritize these cases. While there is a high number of our police out there on the streets, but in each and every police station, there are still mandate for safety and security of our communities.
Right.
But we really want to assure our women that whatever commitments we have made, we are not going to slow down on them.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. That's the Deputy Minister for Women in the Presidency for Women, Youth and People Living with Disabilities. Let's take a quick ad break now. We'll be back with more news. Stay with us.